Hello, my name is Jasmine Dowling, and today I will be reviewing a research paper written by Stuyck, Cleeremans, and Bussche. It was published in 2022, and it is called AHA Under Pressure. The AHA experience is not constrained by cognitive load. Insight can be explained as a moment when the solution to a problem suddenly pops into your consciousness. It is highly subjective and has drawn a lot of attention from researchers, as most problem solving requires multiple steps rather than a sudden phenomenon. Usually, solving a problem requires the problem solver to devise a strategy. This process is referred to as non-insight, and it requires a lot more conscious effort than insight, of which feels effortless. The comparison between effortless and effortful processing can be explained by dual processing theories, which suggest that type 1 processes are unconscious and effortless. These are also not constrained by the capacity of working memory. In contrast, type 2 processes are conscious, effortful, and are restricted by the limits of working memory. Now you're probably thinking, aren't type 1 processes just insight and type 2 processes just non-insight? Well, one way to truly assess this is to decipher whether insight is limited by working memory capacity. This would involve getting participants to undergo a primary problem-solving task while also executing a secondary working memory task. If the primary task is also using working memory, the limited capacity of working memory would reduce performance on that primary task. However, one issue that arises when trying to assess this is that you cannot create a problem that can only be solved with insight or only be solved with non-insight. Therefore, researchers have developed problems that have an equal chance of being solved with either method. An example of this is the compound remote association test. So here is an example of a CRA test. Participants are given 3 words and then have to come up with a 4th conjunction word that would make sense with each of the 3 words. So the answer for this one is card. With all of this in mind, the researchers of the present study wondered whether insight problem solving occurs through type 1 processes and therefore does not rely on working memory, unlike non-insight problem solving. They hypothesized that insight, like non-insight, relies on type 2 processes. To explore this, the researchers manipulated working memory load by creating 3 groups: no load, low load, and high load. They predicted that an increase in working memory load would result in a decreased performance of problems solved using non-insight. However, if insight is also dependent on working memory capacity, this should also result in poorer performance. This study aims to fill the gaps in previous literature and address methodological issues by being the first dual task study to use only one problem type, the CRA test. To test this hypothesis, the researchers recruited 106 psychology undergraduate students through convenience sampling. Of the participants, 91 were female and there was an average age of 18. Most of the participants were also Dutch, and therefore the Dutch version of the CRA test was selected. Random allocation assigned the participants to the 3 conditions. Participants underwent 75 CRA trials. Those in the low and high load conditions were also asked to perform a working memory task while solving these trials. Those in the low load condition were asked to remember 2 numbers prior to each trial, and those in the high load condition were asked to remember 4. Here is an example of the slides that the low load condition participants were shown. As you can see, these participants were presented with their 2 digits prior to a CRA trial. The trial was then shown for 25 seconds. If they could not solve the problem within this allocated time, they automatically moved on to the next trial. Next, participants had to indicate whether they solved the problem via means of insight or non-insight or another method entirely. Lastly, participants had to recall the digits that they were shown at the beginning of the trial, of which they had no time limit for. Statistical analysis involved excluding any trials solved with another strategy. They also excluded any incorrect solutions to the working memory task and the CRA trials. To analyze the remaining data, they used 3 generalized linear mixed models. These analyses compared insight and non-insight for solution time, accuracy, confidence, and type. Post hoc tests indicated that there were no significant differences between the 3 levels of working memory load for problems solved with insight. This figure highlights this further. As you can see, the number of correct problems solved with insight remains relatively stable across the 3 conditions. However, this is not the case for non-insight. As you can see, the number of correct trials solved in the no-load condition is recognizably higher than in the high-load condition. These results show that limiting the availability of working memory resources resulted in a reduction in correctly solved trials with non-insight. However, those solved with insight were unaffected. This supports the dual processing theories, as the results indicate that insight operates outside the limits of working memory and therefore appears to be a type 1 process. These results also support the idea that non-insight problem solving is dependent on the availability of working memory resources and therefore appears to be a type 2 process. Future research could explore the limits of insight, as it would be very interesting to identify whether other specific circumstances impact insight. Future studies should also use this method in samples that are balanced for biological sex to increase the generalizability of the findings. Limitations of the current research include the large exclusion of data in the high load condition. Therefore, results should be interpreted with caution due to the unbalanced data exclusion. In essence, these findings fill a gap in previous literature by resolving some of the methodological issues in the past studies. Therefore, this study provides more convincing evidence that insight is an unconscious type 1 process and that non-insight is a conscious type 2 process. Thank you for listening to my presentation.